Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of In the Kitchen with Baker Girl. Thank you, Jesus. It is another beautiful day to be in the kitchen, and today's video is all about delicious, buttery apple pie. Yep, that's what we're making today in our pie video. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss out on any time I upload a video. And also the recipe for this apple pie will be included in the description box. So check below this video if you want the recipe so you can bake along with me. Now, let's jump right into the video. Now, here in front of me, I have an assortment of apples, because to produce a good apple pie, you need more than just one kind of apple. So the first apple that comes to mind is a Granny Smith. And a Granny Smith apple is good because it has a good amount of apple flavor. It also is very high in pectin, which is the reason why it's tardy. And it holds up well, but you don't want to bake a full pie out of all Granny Smiths. Your pie will be too tardy, and your apples will be, you'll still have firm apples because Granny Smith holds its shape very well. So I have one Granny Smith apple for the pectin and the flavor. I also have Cosmic Crisp apple. Now this apple, it's crisp like it says, but it's also slightly sweet and it holds its shape very well. It gives you like a nice, like you've ever bitten into a very good tender apple pie. A Cosmic Crisp will give you that nice crisp apple. And then also I have Honey Crisp apples. Now you notice I have way more Honey Crisp apples than I have of the Cosmic Crisp or the Granny Smith. That is because I prefer a Honey Crisp apple over all the other apples in terms of the majority of apple in my pie, because they are exactly what they say. They are sweet, they are crisp, but they also cook very well. They break down nicely, but they don't turn to mush. So I have more, and don't worry, I'll leave the total of the weights of the apples in the recipe so you don't have to guess, because as you can see, these are fairly small, whereas these are a little bit larger. So knowing the weight of your apples is very useful when you're making a pie. So using a combination of different varieties of apples will give you a good pie. You can use all Honey Crisp, you can use all Cosmic Crisp, but I like to use a combination because each apple has different pectin levels. So if you put them all together, all rounded out, you'll end up with a delicious apple pie. So first I'm going to start off by peeling my apples, and I'm going to peel them and slice them. Now, whether you choose to dice or you choose to slice, that's entirely up to you. I'm going to slice because I think the finished pie just looks a lot, it just looks prettier to me. It looks more like apple pie. Now I've got all my apples peeled, and now it's just time to slice them. So I'm just going to cut them in half, and then I just take a knife and remove the apple core just like that. And then I'm just going to slice the apple. You want to slice your apple about 1/4 inch thick, because you don't want the apple to, you don't want the slices to be too tiny. So I just slice them about 1/4 inch thick, and that's just perfect. Put them right into the bowl. Okay, so I've got all my apples nicely sliced and peeled and sliced. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in some lemon zest, because I'm going to use some lemon juice in the apple pie, so no need to waste the zest. You don't have to add lemon zest. I do. I just think it adds a nice brightness. I always add it to an apple pie. So get all the zest off, and then I turn my zester upside down, and I go ahead and slice my lemon. you want about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, which usually winds up being about the juice of 1 lemon. And I juiced it right over the zester because the zester catch the seeds. It also helps counterbalance all that sweetness because a little acid goes a long way when you're talking about a lot of sugar. So we're not going to use a lot of sugar, but we are going to use some sugar. Okay, and just a little tap. And there you see all my seeds stays in my zester and did not go into my apples. Okay, and then just take a spatula and toss the apples together. So I'm going to set this aside. And I'm going to reach for a skillet because, as I say, I'm going to cook the apples down. Not cook them down, but just give them a jump start to go ahead and start cooking. And the reason why I started this so early in the morning is the filling does need to cool down. So I'm going to start by melting some butter. And then once the butter is melted, I'll go ahead and add in my sugar. Now I'm going to start off by adding my brown sugar. And the brown sugar is optional. You can use all regular granulated sugar. But now I'm going to reserve 2 tablespoons of my regular granulated sugar. And I'll explain why I'm reserving it a little bit. But I'll go ahead and add in the remainder of the sugar. Add that in. And then I'm going to go ahead and toss in my apples. So add those in. And before you add anything else, you do want this to start to, you want the apples to start getting juicy before you add anything else at this point. Okay, so the apples are bubbling away nicely. And I'm just going to give them a little stir. You don't really want the apples to just start to directly cooking at this point. And one thing I am going to add in is a little pinch of salt. Just a little pinch of salt. You may not think of salt in baking, but salt brings out all the flavors. So add some salt. And I'm going to take that reserved amount of sugar that I set aside, those 2 tablespoons, I'm going to go ahead and pour them into just a little bowl so I can mix everybody together. And I'm going to add in to the sugar, I'm going to add in 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. You can use more cinnamon, less cinnamon, but I just like 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And I'm adding the sugar, the cinnamon in with the sugar because as you see, it dissolves better. You just sprinkle sugar and cinnamon in to the apples, it could clump up. And then because sugar helps to disperse the dry ingredients better, I'm going to go ahead and mix the flour and the cornstarch. I have 2 tablespoons of flour and 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, equal amounts. And I'm just going to go ahead and mix those into the sugar before I add it in to this mixture here. And this should be hot before you add it in. So I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle that in. There we are. Add that in. And then just mix it up. And now this is when the thickener starts to activate. So you want to kind of be quick so it doesn't have time to lump. You can also mix this up with a little bit of the juice and then pour it in there too. That will also help with the clumping. But if you go ahead and kind of be quick about it, you can prevent it from clumping. Then you do want to give it a nice stir at this point. You don't want to just walk away from it, and you don't want to put the lid back on. We're not trying to cook this anymore. We're just trying to activate the thickeners. Okay. Now you don't want to keep cooking it, so go ahead and turn the heat off. Okay, so this is thickening very nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the heat. All right, so I've got my thickened, cooked apple pie filling here. I'm actually going to take my own piece of advice, and I'm just going to taste a little bit of it, just to see, make sure I'm totally happy with the way it tastes. Because some apples sometimes can be a little sweeter than others. Sometimes they can be even more tartier than, no 2 apples are ever exactly the same. So you can make 1,000 pies. You could still add more sugar at some point, or sometimes you might want to have to reduce the sugar. Jesus. That's nice. But I can hear my dad. It needs more sugar. I can hear my daddy saying it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in another tablespoon of sugar. At this point, the filling is hot, so the sugar will melt very nicely. Okay. And see, you wouldn't know that unless you taste it. And then once you baked your pie and then you set it out on the table and everybody's having a slice and you're like, this could have used more sugar. You don't really want to get yourself into that position. Now I'm going to go ahead and spread my filling out onto a baking sheet. And I'm going to let this cool. And then just spread this out on a baking sheet to cool. You want to let this cool completely before you add it to your pie crust. So let this cool. All right, so I'm back with my cooled apple pie filling. Actually, the sun has moved on over a good bit, but I let this cool for really until it cooled, and then I put it in the refrigerator. So now it is cold, and that's important. The reason why it's important is because your filling has already got a jump start in cooking. So if you were to put this in room temperature into your pie crust, because it's already jump started in the cooking, your apples would actually be fairly mushy because they would then overcook. So the filling is cold, straight out of the fridge. And my pie crust is chilled. I'm going to set that aside. I have here a 10-inch deep dish pie plate. This is glass. I like to use glass because I can kind of see what's going on underneath. And this is my all butter pie crust. As I said before, I'll leave a link in the iCards with the recipe and everything included. So I made the double crust, and I have my top crust. I have that rolled out into a 12-inch. That is staying cool in the refrigerator. So take your cooled filling and just pour it in there, however you want to pour it in. I like to kind of tuck mine in like that. And if you have problems with your pie crust, your bottom crust being soggy, no matter what you do, whether you bake your pie long enough or you blind bake it or whatever, and it still turns out a little soggy, what I would do is, here's a little trick for you. I would take some egg white, and I would brush some egg white on the bottom of the crust before you put your apples in. What that does is the egg white kind of seals it and prevent but most of the moisture from just seeping into your bottom crust. So if you have problems with the soggy crust underneath your filling, try the egg white tip out. I think that'll help you out a lot. Okay, now I have egg yolk, and I also have just a little bit of water, and I'm going to mix this up. I need this for two things. I need this to glue the top and the bottom crust together. That seals it, and it doesn't prevent it completely, but it helps stop any of the filling from seeping out. And also I need it to brush on the top pie crust. I'm just going to take my egg wash. You can use a whole egg, but a whole egg gets very runny. So brush this all around the edges. If your pie crust is starting to get warm, I would just stick once you get your pie assembled, I would just put the pie back in the refrigerator to let it chill, because you don't want a warm pie dough going into the oven. Now, when you roll your crust out, you want to make sure that you leave a good lip so that you can set your top crust on top, which is what I'm about to do now. So here I've got my top crust that I've rolled out, and it's chilled, so I can very easily pick it up and, without further ado, set it right on top, just like that. And then around the edges, just press the edges together like that. That's where the egg comes in. It just binds the edges together. There we are. Very nice. This this is coming together really nicely. Thank the Lord. Who says pies had to be difficult? Okay, now obviously you've got some overhang here that you don't need. So I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and trim that off. Okay, now I'm left with a few scraps. You can roll these out and put some pretty little decorative pie trimmings around your pie if you want to, or you can save them. When I'm making a lot of pies, I have a collection of little pie scraps. Okay, now I'm just going to crimp my pie crust. And to do that, I'm just going to fold the two edges together that we've pressed together. I'm going to fold them over now. And I show you how to crimp a pie crust with a pretty crimping. I show you that in my All Butter Pie Crust video. So be sure to check that out. Okay, there we are. It's all nicely together. Now I'm just going to go ahead and use my 2 fingers and my index finger, and I'm going to crimp my crust. And there we are. It's nicely crimped. Now, one thing you do want to do is you want to take that egg wash that we made. I'm actually going to go ahead and add the rest of the water into it. And I'm just going to brush it over the top of the pie. This helps the crust to get a very nice golden color. There are 2 things you can do. If you don't want egg, because so far we haven't used eggs, and some may be allergic to eggs, you can use water. So you can brush the top with water, and then you can sprinkle the top of your pie crust with some raw sugar. I have some raw sugar, the coarse raw cane sugar. You can sprinkle the top of that on it, and that'll give you a very nice golden crust because the sugar will caramelize while the pie bakes. Or you can use an egg wash, or you can just use plain water. There's no need to, if you don't want to use the egg or you don't want to use the sugar, you don't need to. You can just use plain water. But you kind of do want to put something on it because it helps the crust to brown. So some water, some cream, some milk, something you can put on there to make sure it gets nicely browned. Now I've got my oven preheating to 400. Well, I actually have my oven already preheated to 425 degrees. Now we're not going to bake the pie at 425 degrees. We're actually going to bake the pie at 350 degrees. But putting the pie in the oven at 425 degrees gives the crust a jump start in baking, and it also prevents the butter from melting while the pie heats up, because that can happen very easily. So if you ever put a pie in the oven and then it just sits there and melt, your oven temperature was a little bit cool for that butter going straight in like that. Okay. Now, of course, you got to have some way of venting to let the steam out. So I'm just going to cut some slits right into the top of the pie. You want to make sure you really, really slice them so that they don't completely close up. And I can never get this, I can never make this even. I try, but it's never dead center. Never is dead center. But anyway, all we can do is keep trying. Okay, so I've got my pie nicely done. Now I'm going to cover this with foil. And I'll show you what I mean by covering it with foil. So I'm going to cut out a piece of foil about that size. And I am going to cut a slit right in the middle of it. Watch your fingers. Watch your fingers. Okay. Then I'm going to take a pair of scissors. Actually, let me set this aside. I'm going to take a pair of scissors, and I'm just going to cut slits all around here. Because the pie bakes so long, the crust of the top will start to brown faster than the remaining. So you don't want that to start brown too quickly. Also, I'm going to spray the foil with a little bit of baking spray. That prevents it from sticking to the crust. Now lay this right on top. Of course, the first thing it did was stick, which I expected it to, because of the egg. Okay, and then just peel this back, because we do want the center to get some, we do want the center to be exposed, but not all the crust. And this just prevents your crust from browning too fast, the edges of your crust from browning, because they always start to cook first. Okay, so I am going to get this in the oven, and as I say, the oven is preheated to 425 degrees. Right before I place the pie in the oven, and before I open the oven door, I'm going to drop the temperature down to 350 degrees. Then I'm going to put the pie in. I'm going to put the pie on a baking sheet. I'm going to put the pie into the oven, and I'm going to let the pie bake. Now start checking your pie at an hour. You do want to remove the foil so that the pie, after about 50 minutes, remove the foil so that the pie crust has the chance to bake evenly, browned all the way around. Don't bake the pie fully with the foil on top, or the edges of your crust will not get a nice golden brown. So into the oven she goes. Okay, so the pie is out the oven and it has cooled completely. Now I baked the pie at 350 degrees for a total of 2 hours. After 50 minutes, I removed the aluminum foil off the top and then let the pie finish baking. Now I did put the pie at the bottom of the oven rack, because I have my rack in 2 layers, so a bottom and then a rack at the near the top, or halfway up near the top. And so I baked the pie for an hour at the bottom, on the bottom rack, and I did put a piece of parchment underneath to catch the spills, because after an hour I removed the baking tray. You don't need to bake the pie for the full length of time on the baking tray. So after an hour, when I took the aluminum foil off, I also removed the baking tray. That way the bottom crust has no hindrance between it and the heat. So I put a piece of parchment just down on the bottom rack to catch any spills. There will always be spills when you're baking a fruit pie. It doesn't matter what you do. The thickeners, the pre-cooking, you're gonna have some spills. So always put a little piece of parchment right underneath, right under the pie, so it can catch all the spills. And then after an hour, I rotated the pie and put it in the top upper oven rack and let it finish baking. And one good way to know is, obviously the filling will be bubbly, because you'll notice it in the little slits. They let the steam out, and that kind of, you can see little bubbles. And also you can take a knife and you can stick it right into the slits. And if the knife goes in smoothly, just like you're checking a potato for doneness, you can do the same thing in the little slits in the pie. And if it goes in nice and tender and your pie is nice and bubbly and your crust is nice and brown, your pie is done. Now, the reason why it takes 2 hours is some pie bakers tell you to bake, any pie at 375 degrees. In my opinion, unless you have a normal size apple pie, not, like a ton of apples, to me, that's a little bit too high. So I like to bring the temperature down once I put it in from that 425 degrees, because it allows everything to bake at a nice, hot, gentle heat without it over browning, and then you end up with raw apples on the inside. And just 350 degrees for 2 hours. And like I said earlier, it does take time for apple pie to bake. So, it's one of the longest baking pies. An apple pie and a blueberry pie takes the longest time to bake. But that's why you can do them a day ahead of time. And that's what I want to get to. Now, this pie is completely cooled. And once it came out of the oven, I just set it aside and let it cool completely. You want to let it cool because it's like, number one, it's like molten lava. There's nothing you can do with it. Number two, it needs time for the filling to set up and kind of jelly. It gets nice and not like jelly, but it gets nice and smooth because it sets up. So it's just like you're making a custard and then you let it cool and then you stir it, and you know how your custard is fully cooled, it's thickened, it's ready to eat. Same thing with a pie. Now, one thing I want to say, if you notice, my crimping around the edges slightly disappeared. That happens for 2 reasons. Number one, I use the All Butter Pie Crust. So the volume of butter that I use in my pie crust is a little higher than most. Reason number 2 why it happens, if you watch my pie crust, my All Butter Pie Crust video, I do a layered pastry where when I'm forming my pie crust, when I'm making my pie crust, I fold it into layers and then roll it, and then fold more layers and roll it. That gives you kind of like almost like a puff pastry consistency. So when my pie baked in the oven, the crust actually, as you can see, it puffed up. And it puffed up very nicely, and you can see all the buttery layers in the crust. It's really nice because, let me zoom in on that. There you are. You can see the nice buttery layers in the crust. That's because of the kind of like puff pastry step that I do with my pastry. If you just mix your pastry up and then just form it into disc, you won't get that layered, puffy, flaky pastry that we all want in a good pie. So I've been running my mouth about pie. The pie has cooled, and now it's time to cut a slice. But before I cut a slice of this pie, I do want to say that this is the best pie for make ahead. So I don't want to serve this pie right now, but I'm going to go ahead and cut it so you can see exactly all the pretty apples on the inside. But I don't want to cut it right now because I'm not going to serve it right now. I will cut it right now, but I don't want to serve it right now. But if you are baking your pie at a time, this is a perfect pie to make ahead, and you can keep this up to 2 days. And then, as I said in my clip, my pie tips clip, you can reheat it. And then it'll be fresh and delicious. And actually, I encourage you to make your pie a day ahead of time. Number one, if you're having a dinner and you're serving pie, it takes the stress. Number two, it saves your oven because this pie bakes for 2 hours. And then number three, it gives the flavors of the pie the time to set up and the pie to get nicely set up, and your slices will come out a lot neater. Okay, enough talking. Now it's time to slice this pie. Okay, so I have a large stainless steel knife here, and the slits is a good indicator. One thing I am a mess about is even slices of things. So if you were going to cut the entire pie, I would just cut it in half and then cut it into fourth, and then cut each fourth into pieces. That way you know your slices of pie are even. If you're not that fanatical about even slices and even everything, then you can cut it with ease. But the slits is a good indicator of where you can cut. So I'm going to go ahead and cut right in here. Oh wow, that's very tender. And like I say, I'm just going to cut a little piece so you can get a peek inside. All right. And you're supposed to cut 2 slices, and then it helps the first slice to get out. But I don't want to mess the pie up, so I'm just going to slip this slice out. And nobody needs to ask where that slice went. Okay, I need to cut this again. Oh, and one thing, I want you to have a peek at the bottom crust. Make sure to do this really, really quickly. Okay, did you see the bottom crust? It's nice and golden, and that's what we want. Now, the pie, I was quick, but the pie isn't going to go anywhere because the filling has completely set. But I don't want to risk anything, so. But I did want you to get a little quick glimpse. Okay, so the first piece is never the prettiest. Out she comes, and oh wow, look at that. That is just beautiful. I think my saucer is too small. Let me grab a bigger saucer. That looks so good. And look at all the tender apples. Let me zoom in so you can have a look. Oh wow, that looks so good. And you notice how the filling is not running everywhere. It's not like, you got apple filling running all over the place because of the way we made the filling, you don't have, like a runny apple pie. And you can see how all the apple slices are perfectly cooked and perfectly tender. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Now, let's do a little pie analysis. I'm going to zoom in again. You see all the nice flaky layers in the pastry? The pastry is not too thick. It's not too thin. You don't have that thick band of crust at the back. Oh, wow. Oh, thank the Lord. It's such a blessing when God blesses your work and it actually turns out the way, because all pies, let's be real, they do not always turn out perfectly all the time. And that's perfectly fine, because every pie is a different pie. So if a pie doesn't go right, or it doesn't have the, the look that you want or whatever, don't worry about it. It'll be delicious. And you know what I always say, if you make it from scratch in your own kitchen, it's going to be delicious no matter which way you slice it. Now, I'm quite a fan of counterbalancing sweet with something creamy, but not necessarily sweet. Now, this is my homemade Greek yogurt, and I have a yogurt video. I show you how to make your own homemade yogurt from scratch. It's very easy. I'll link that in the iCards. So this is whole milk Greek yogurt, and it's so creamy. It's delicious. It's unsweetened because there's enough sweetness running around in the pie. So I'm just going to... let me set you aside. I'm just going to put a little dollop right here because I like the yogurt with the apple pie. Okay. Oh, wow. First of all, I always taste the filling first. So let me try some apple first. Thank you, Jesus. Oh, wow. Look at how nice and tender those apples are. That's good. That's really good. Now, everything is tender. There's no crunchy apples. Thank you, Jesus. This is so good. Oh, wow. The flavors of that pie crust. The butter just sings. I mean, that might sound funny, but the butter just sings. It's so good. Oh, wow. This is a big trick for me because I don't eat a lot of desserts. Even though I make them, you don't always get to eat them. So it's always a treat when I can have something sweet. That is so good. Wow. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's an in-depth video on how to make a homemade apple pie from scratch in your own kitchen from start to finish. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because we are just in the second week of November and there are more pie episodes to come. So in order not to miss out, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and the good Lord willing, I will see you in the next pie episode. In the meantime, take care, y'all. Bye.